we changed the name. Used to be Center of International Studies.
Oh, okay, I see.
But now it changed the name to AMSO Global. It's become a more service-oriented unit.
So
before it's more academics, yeah.
Do you still call it a center or something?
No, we no longer call it center. We call it AMSO Global.
Just AMSO Global. Right?
Yeah,
okay.
It's more general, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's too general. Sometimes we don't know what it means, okay? Right? But yeah, every director came and then they changed the name. So
yeah, I can see that people are coming in.
Oh, you can okay. You can see. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, the number of participants.
Yeah, 14. Okay, yeah.
I don't see your gallery or the big everybody's face.
Yeah, you don't see the face. Okay.
Oh, okay, because it's a webinar. Yeah.
Because they use a special application, so I don't even see the name. Okay.
Yeah.
I only know the number, but I don't know the name.
All right.
Yeah. You cannot see, right? You cannot see the name.
I cannot see. I cannot see.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
See, right now the sun,
is out. Okay.
Yeah, it's out.
Well, it's good
for a few minutes. For a few minutes,
Okay.
in Seattle.
Yeah. Here today is dark outside for me. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. 11 attendance. Okay. Okay, I think we can start. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Let me start. Good morning, everybody. I'm Hongkei Feng, Dr. Y. Zhang, Professor of Chinese Studies. Today, I'm very happy to invite a friend, a longtime friend, Professor Zhao Yao, to come to talk with us on internationalization of Chinese currency and Chinese offshore bonds. And let me introduce Professor Yao a little bit. And Professor Yao is the chair and professor of the Department of Finance at Albert School of Business and Economics at Seattle University. And currently he's also the director for the Master of Science in Finance programs. And Professor Yao holds a PhD degree in finance from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He also a CFA charter holder. Professor Yao published many articles in scholarly journals and chapters in books, professional handbooks, and investment practitioner journals. He's also the co-author and editor of several books, including Dim Sum Bond, the offshore Chinese currency denominated bonds, published by John Wiley. And he's co-founded Strategic Option Investment Advisors Limited, a Hong Kong-based hedge fund. So as you can see, that Professor Yao is both an academic and practitioner. So we are very lucky to have Professor Yao to come here to share his experience with us on the Chinese currency and offshore bonds. So Professor Yao, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Hongkei. It's my pleasure to be here today. And first of all, I would like to thank Professor Feng and AMSO Global for inviting me to give a talk on today's topic that is timely and getting a lot of attention from the global investors and policymakers. Today's topic is internationalization of our RMB and dim sum bonds. Now, for those who are not familiar with the topic, let me explain the title of this talk and then the connection between RMB internationalization and dim sum bonds. In fact, on the first page, you can see that I put up the book cover of our book. I co-author with Professor Feng on dim sum bonds. And so you wonder what is the connection. So first of all, let me explain what the RMB is. In fact, the RMB is the acronym for the renminbi, which is the Chinese currency. before I talk about this, this is the outline. Basically, I'm going over, talking about the connection between the two and explain the title a little bit for the technical terms. And then I will go over the goals and strategies of RMB internationalization. And then specifically, because there are many strategies and sub-strategies, so I will be focusing on 5 of them. And then at the end, I will summarize and hopefully give you some takeaways. So first of all, as I just mentioned, RMB or renminbi, actually sometimes we call it the Chinese yuan. The renminbi is the currency, and then the currency's unit of account is yuan, which is the same as a dollar. And as you can see, 1 yuan can be further divided into 10 jiao or 100 fen. So jiao is like our dime, and fen is just like our pennies. So these are just the units of accounts. Renminbi and yuan are terms that we use interchangeably in the trade and in the literature. And we will follow the convention here in this presentation today. Yuan is labeled CNY, which is the acronym for Chinese yuan in the foreign exchange market, which indicates the official exchange rate. Whereas the CNH is the acronym for Chinese yuan in Hong Kong, which represents the offshore exchange rate quoted in Hong Kong for the renminbi. And also you can see that there is another notation or another label that you may see, which is the digital CNY. The digital CNY actually is the digital yuan, primarily set up for improving the efficiency of domestic payments, serving the unbanked, and fighting corruption. And so this is kind of a trial program, and it first started a year ago, and now it has been extended to several actually provinces and cities. So these are some of the terms that you will see in the presentation. What is the internationalization of renminbi? And why does China actually want to internationalize the renminbi? As I see it, there are 2 reasons, actually. I'm going too fast a little bit, pardon me. And as I can see it, there are 2 motivations or goals. The first one is geopolitical. Basically, China tries to avoid sanctions by Western powers. And in fact, it is a decade-old ambition, got reinvigorated in the early 2010s when US sanctions on Iran highlighted China's own vulnerability to systematic financial punishment by Western powers. And if you are old enough, you remember that actually back in the 50s, when there was a North Korea war, and then also during the 60s and 70s, early 70s, that we still had the Cold War. And so at that time, China was subject to sanctions by the US. And so in 2015, after Russia was hit with sanctions over its invasion of Crimea the previous year, China accelerated the pace of renminbi internationalization. So in a sense that this is the first goal, in fact, is more geopolitical. The second one, in fact, is economic. And China realized that in order to avoid sanctions or to become more independent from the from the Western financial systems or banking system, they have become more independent. And one of the requirements is to be making renminbi to become a global reserve currency. And of course, there would be economic advantages of being a fiat currency. Basically, a fiat currency doesn't need reserve assets to back up the printed banknotes. So a lot of people think that China is trying to compete with the US for this status, being the major global reserve currency. Now, of course, achieving the economic goal will probably help attain the first one. However, it's not easy actually to achieve these goals. So as early as 2004, China had conjured up a grand scheme for the RMB internationalization, and which is actually formally announced and adopted at the 12 five-year plan for national economic and social development. Basically at that national conference, and it was adopted that Hong Kong would become the first offshore renminbi center to support the internationalization efforts. And however, China still has to resolve the impossible trinity, because China's exchange rate, interest rate, and capital flows are all controlled by the central government. Structurally, China will be facing this impossible trinity. In the literature, we call this the Mendel-Fleming's trilemma. So this is not even a dilemma, it is one more. We got three problems at the same time, meaning that they need to maintain a stable currency, free movement of capital flows, and also an independent monetary policy at the same time. Unfortunately, China still actually has very tight controls on capital flows. And so, it is therefore not easy to solve this impossible trinity. Again, probably the strategy for China is to solve it one at a time. And as you can see, the first thing that they actually try to relax a little bit is the exchange rate. And let me show you the exchange fluctuations of the renminbi in the past decade. Here, you can see the exchange movements from 2012 to actually a couple of days ago, a few days ago, when I prepared this transparency. It's March 29th. In this graph, the exchange rate, they were quoted as renminbi per US dollar. So as you see, if there is an upward slope, that indicates that the renminbi is depreciating against the US dollars. When you see a downward slope, that means that the renminbi is appreciating. It's kind of against your intuition, but as the directions, and you can see this, there are actually several places where you can see the renminbi actually depreciated against the US dollars. The first time it was significant depreciation was in 2015, which is around August 11th. The renminbi actually devalued by nearly 3% against US dollars in 2 days. Now, this was a one-off devaluation by China's central bank. Unfortunately, that speared unprecedented capital flight. The China's central bank had to use $320 billion US dollars of foreign exchange reserve to support the renminbi. But still, there was stampede of capital outflows, and it ended up China put on very harsh capital controls. Many believe that it was this particular move to devalue the currency was a desperate attempt by China to boost exports in support of an economy that was growing at the slowest rate in decades. However, the People's Bank of China claimed that the devaluation is part of its reform to move forward a more market-oriented economy. The move had substantial repercussions worldwide. And from then on, you can see that the trend is actually upward. Remember, upward indicates that there had been depreciation of renminbi against the US dollars until it was kind of like the beginning of 2017. Then it started to appreciate against the US dollars, but then it also hit the peak at around the mid-year 2018. Again, you can see that over time, there are basically substantial depreciation, and then appreciation, and then depreciation. And in fact, very recently, in the last couple of years, then you see that it was kind of the bottom for the Chinese yuan against US dollars. And it started, then the value started to appreciate back. Now, for the last couple of months, then you see that the Chinese yuan started to depreciate. So it hit the lower bound, and then it's again depreciating against the US dollars. It looks like that is just the beginning here. But the point that I was trying to show from this graph is that it is quite clear that the fluctuations in the exchange rate of the renminbi would have unexpected impact on its journey to RMB internationalization. In fact, later on, when I talk about the dim sum bonds, and you can see the connection, the dim sum bonds performance very much tied to the currency value of renminbi. And in this journey, we will also see the RMB internationalization is related to the Belt and Road Initiative as well. So before I talk about these things, and then let's see, how did China embark their journey on internationalizing the RMB? Broadly speaking, I think that there are a few strategies that China tried to do. First, they tried to encourage trading partners to use RMB as the currency for invoicing in international trade, since China is a major trade partner to Europe and the US. The latest figure that I have for 2021, the total amount of trade with the EU, with the European Union, was 828 billion US dollars. With the US, it was $756 billion. Again, recently, of course, when we were looking at the Russian conflict with recent conflict, actually war with Ukraine, a lot of people were wondering how much actually trade that Russia had with China, and the 2021 statistics is about $147 billion. So it's a fraction, just a fraction of the amount that actually China did with the European Union and with the US. The second strategy for China to internationalizing the currency is to create a liquid market for trading. This is basically is kind of a prerequisite for facilitating payments for international trade and investments. Without a market that allows people to convert the currencies and pay for their trade or for investments, in China, a liquid foreign exchange market is necessary. And so Hong Kong was actually chosen as the first offshore market for trading with renminbi. This is also actually gives China a buffer to systematic fluctuations from the world markets. They use Hong Kong as a buffer to reduce the impact from the global economy or the global financial markets. The third strategy to internationalizing the renminbi is to increase the use of renminbi as a global reserve currency. Now, of course, this strategy takes time, and as I go over their strategies or their sub-strategies, I will also provide you with a progress report on how China has been doing with regard to these three strategies. Under this grand scheme, as I just presented, the three strategies, we consider them as a grand scheme for internationalizing the renminbi, and there are quite a few sub-strategies that China actually developed and used over time. Some of these are very intentional strategies. Some are kind of impromptu response to external shocks or external factors. And you can see the list here, for example, to develop offshore, as I mentioned, to develop offshore foreign exchange trading centers. And then at the same time, they would develop a bilateral currency swap agreements with many countries. And another thing is like to develop products, the RMB denominated investment products. And dim sum bonds are actually one of the major investment product based on RMB introduced at the beginning to facilitate this, to facilitate the international investments. And you can see that there's some, the one at the bottom of the list, for example, China-Hong Kong Connect, which allows investors to trade Hong Kong stocks and bonds with China, and also allows foreigners to invest in China. And then also the MSCI index component, trying to get the Chinese stock indices or the stocks to become part of the MSCI index. These are the different strategies that allow China to actually to increase the use of renminbi in all areas, particularly investments. Today, I will only focus on only a few, and as I go over each sub-strategy, as I've just alluded earlier, I will also update the progress towards these goals and the challenges that China have to face in each of these strategies. So the first sub-strategy I want to talk about is the offshore RMB markets. The offshore RMB markets include the market for foreign currencies, meaning the trading of renminbi, as well as renminbi deposits, including certificate of deposits with the banks, and also dim sum bonds, which are renminbi denominated bonds. And as you can see here, there's a table that I took from our paper, from the paper that I did with Professor Fong quite some time ago now. I think this is 2012. So it's a decade now. So we have been following the topic. We have been looking into China's internationalization efforts for a decade. Seems like time flies actually. So if you look at this particular table, there, you can see this way back in 2004. Hong Kong, actually as early as 2004, China allowed banks in Hong Kong to accept our RMB deposits, and also they also allowed the trading of renminbi in Hong Kong. And earlier I talked about the CNH. It indicates that that's the renminbi traded and deliverable in Hong Kong. So in a sense that the CNH is actually is an offshore market for its own currencies. And in 2005, actually, there have been other investment products developed in Hong Kong. And they are, it's kind of interesting that when I said that China allowed Hong Kong to do this, but in fact, the regulators would be the Hong Kong monetary authorities. They are the bank regulators. Obviously, it requires collaboration between, Hong Kong MA, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and China to set up these trading centers or trading activities in Hong Kong. The CNH products is not just for investors. In fact, there have been quite a few CNH products for corporations, and this could be one of the major efforts that have been launched in Hong Kong at the beginning. Dim sum bonds came around in 2007 as there were demands for investment products, and so Hong Kong became the first offshore market for the RMB. And now let me talk a little bit more about the dim sum bonds, although towards the end, I will show you also the recent developments in this particular market. Dim sum bonds are basically nicknamed after the local Cantonese food for simple snacks, or for, actually we usually take it for breakfast or for lunch. And so the nickname was given primarily to indicate that this is something developed in Hong Kong, and in fact, it was with the Chinese government's blessing. Without the efforts, then there would not be such a market. And so we always argue. Professor Fong and I actually have been working on a paper for looking at whether the dim sum bond market is a government policy-driven market or a market-driven market. We believe that the market is very much policy driven. And because at the very beginning, it was created by the Chinese government, and they have, the market has received a lot of supports from the Chinese government over time. And I will be talking more about the dim sum bond market towards the end of this presentation. Of course, before I leave this part, I also need to mention that China started the bilateral local currency swap agreements in 2009 with its trading partners for the settlement of payments arising from international trade. And because of this, this type of local currency swap agreements, there have been quite a few offshore markets for trading renminbi. In fact, there have been quite a lot of trading centers, but in each trading center, such as London, Singapore, Frankfurt, and also Luxembourg, there have always been the local currency swap agreements that support the trading activities. In other words, those two are, they go hand in hand. Without the local currency swap agreements, the offshore trading centers for renminbi would not thrive. The second sub-strategy would be the use of renminbi in global payments. And if you look at this chart, this table, you will see that the yuan has been climbing steadily up the ladder in terms of the percentage of use of the currency for global payments. In 2013, for example, the renminbi was in the 13th place, and a year later, then it jumped up to the fifth, and since then, it's pretty much kept in that position, and it rose up a little bit to the fourth place at the end of last year. In terms of the percentage, however, it is still relatively small compared to the US dollars or the euro as an international payment. So 2.7%, and you can see that China, the US dollar is substantially larger, and the place for the US dollars, however, has been challenged by the euro. So the euro dollar has been closing up. China has gained a little bit over time, but it surpassed the Japanese yen. But you can see that there is another significant part here, which is other countries' currencies as the cross-border numerate. Altogether, these economies, smaller economies, accounted for 11.67%. And so they are actually, the real competitors to renminbi in terms of the cross-border payments. So again, this is something that I would say that there is a kind of a hindrance, not really hindrance, but competition here, definitely from other countries in this regard. And related to this, as I mentioned, the smaller economies, including, well, if you look at the size of the country, they are relatively small. Australia, Canada is large in terms of physical size. Singapore definitely much smaller. Korean one, and then the Swedish krona. All these are they are closing in and competing away some of the use of their currencies as a numerator for international trade. As I mentioned, the reason these smaller economies are inching in against the renminbi is because these smaller markets, these smaller economies, their exchange markets have become more and more liquid. So their transaction costs are much lower. And then the central banks also they try to diversify their holdings. And so many central banks have started to hold these smaller countries' currencies. And so again, that facilitates the use of these currencies in the international payment as well. And so will these competition continue or accelerate? Would the shift towards the renminbi or towards these smaller countries? Then we have to see. As you can see, this, as a global reserve, again, just like the international payments, smaller countries have been, as I just mentioned, inching in, and renminbi has around 2.79% in the special drawing rights. China has only achieved the status very recently in October 2016. So it was definitely a recognition of the importance of renminbi in terms of its use as a global reserve currency. But still, as we can see, for the last 5 years or so, the percentage, in the SDR, the renminbi is still kind of, it's not has not gained much over time, as compared to, of course, to the other two. In fact, it's quite interesting that US dollars actually has been losing its share in the SDR. Right now, it stands at around 59%, but way back at the turn of the century, at around the year 2000, US dollars actually accounted for 70% in the global reserve, in the SDR, in the composition of SDR. Some people argue, for example, Barry Eichengreen, he is a macroeconomist, used to work for the World Bank. He has a paper, an IMF paper. He says that this trend is not a result of currency shifts or interest rate changes. In other words, he looked at it as it's pretty much because of other competitive factors that I've just mentioned. It's because smaller economies, the currencies looks more attractive to the central banks or other countries. And so the diversification is not towards the major currencies, not towards the US, not towards the euro or pound sterling. Rather, they are, they're moving towards the smaller economies, towards the currencies of the smaller economies. And China has to compete with these other currencies. Oh, I'm moving fast sometimes, sorry about this. The fourth sub-strategy, actually, many of you may have learned about this for the almost the last 8 or 9 years. It's called the Belt and Road Initiative. At the beginning, it's called One Belt, One Road, and now it's been changed to BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. BRI is a global infrastructure development that was launched in 2013, and now it pretty much it has gone into many countries. The number that I had, the latest one was 140 countries with 30 international organizations. So the BRI was, this particular initiative targets at infrastructure investments, including, ports, railways, highways, power stations, aviation, and telecommunication developments. And of course, the goal as a sub-strategy of internationalization of renminbi, it aims at promoting the use of RMB as numerate in trade and as well as in the foreign direct investment in African and Asian countries. Now, among other things, meaning, in fact, one can argue that there are different motives of doing the Belt and Road. But the important thing here, as I can see it, is that they complement, the grand strategies in the use of renminbi, either in the direct investments or in trade. And I did not put up a chart there, but if you look at all the projects that China has helped to build in African or Asian countries, then you can see that they are more the emerging countries or emerging economies in Africa and Asia. And unfortunately, recently that the African countries have problem in repaying some of the loans. And so that part has already been slowed down significantly. I saved the best part, the last. The dim sum bonds, which Professor Feng and I have been working on for the last 10 years or so. And dim sum bonds are offshore renminbi denominated bonds. And so today, again, they could be issued in different parts of the world, although the first market, the first market was in Hong Kong and started in 2007. And these offshore renminbi bond markets actually have flourished, and then some of them, unfortunately, kind of disappeared. In this chart, you can see that we have reported, or we have captured all the statistics, all the issues of the dim sum bonds from the very beginning to the end of June in 2021. So altogether, you can see the number of issues at the beginning was kind of started by the Chinese government. There were only a few. In the first 3 years, there were, I remember the details. Actually, if I show you the next chart here, you can see that there are 5 issues, 2007, 2008, 5, and then 2009 with 8 issues. Those issues were primarily government issues issued by the Ministry of Finance or the major policy banks. So there were, either the Bank of China or the ICBC and those banks at the beginning. And then the market picked up significantly, okay, especially in 24, but that was the peak. And then in 2015, there was a major shift in the policy. Remember, that was also the time that China devalued the currencies by 3% in a few days, and so Since then, there have been tight control on the issuance of the market. And so you can see that as the currency value drop, the issues of the renminbi, the issues of dim sum bonds also decreased. And but kind of it hit the lowest, not quite the bottom, but it was on the low side in 2017, and then it started to pick up again. Again, 2020, that was the year that the renminbi did pretty well in terms of its value against the US dollars. But again, during the second half of the pandemic, and then the currency started to depreciate, and so did the number of issuance in the dim sum bond market. And here, as you can see, that altogether, in fact, there were over 3,300 bonds issued. The amount here, these were in $1 million, so it's quite substantial. But then, if you look at the issue amount, it's quite, it fluctuated significantly. And for example, here around 2019, the average size issue was $825 million for each issue, and then it started to decline the last 2 years. We have been following this market for quite some time, as I said, over the last decade, and you can see though the market has developed relatively well in Hong Kong, however, but other offshore markets like Taiwan, for example, it thrived for a few years, and now the market is pretty much gone. It dried up. Again, it was definitely affected by the geopolitics, but more importantly, it is the connection with the trade and also the foreign investments of the two countries, or the two places, economies, I would say. I shouldn't use country, but the two economies. So this particular market is kind of interesting, is because this is still one of the major efforts that China used to provide opportunities for foreign investors to hold renminbi in some yield instruments, some instruments that yield returns. And so again, the bonds performance pretty much depends on the currency value. There is a high correlation between the renminbi's value with the issuance in this particular market. We have witnessed a new trend, though, in this market for the last couple of years. Seems like that, for the last couple of years, although we have seen the appreciation of renminbi, and then the depreciation of the renminbi, and even though there have been significant changes in the currency, it seems like that there have been significant demands for these type of products, especially in Hong Kong. So in other words, there are still investors who would hold renminbi, or at least for the short-term period. And you can see these tenure, the maturity length, pretty much still hover around the 3 to 4 years. That means that there are quite a lot of investors who park the money in renminbi, and so but they could not find too many attractive investments. So investors started to demand issues additional issues from certain issuers. So there has been a trend, we call it the reverse inquiries in investment banking, that investors would actually knock on the doors of some issuers, such as the major policies bank, the 4 policy banks of China, and ask them to reopen certain bond issues and ask them to actually reissue new series of bonds so that they can invest in the bonds. For one particular reason is because they want to park their money, their investments, but some issuers that have good reputation, that have good credit, the four policies banks of China, of course, they have the reputation and financial ability to support the bonds. And so they find that this is an interesting trend. And well, I would say that these are, kind of summarizing the talk for today. When we talk about the, look at the RMB internationalization, and we look at the sub-strategies and the progress of these sub-strategies, on these sub-strategies, I would say that RMB internationalization still has a long way to go. Number one, which affects this, is because trade has been slowed down significantly. I'm referring to not just the trade between US and China, of course. The relations is pretty tense, but because the world trade has been slowed down by the recent conflicts, between countries, and so I think that it would slow down the renminbi internationalization. On the other front, that whether renminbi would become a global reserve currency, again, it going back to the relationship or the correlations between the currency value and the use of it. I would say that depreciation of renminbi definitely slows down, the growth in such a use, and in fact, in terms of investments, in the investment area, it slows down the growth in the dim sum bond market, and also it also slows down the expansion of Belt and Road Initiative. The African countries are not doing well economically, and in fact, recently, Financial Times has a big article on questioning whether African countries would be able to repay the loans to China. And all these add together, I would say that internationalization of renminbi still has a long way to go. It may be moving forward, but at a very slow pace. Last but not least, the tight capital controls with still arguably immature capital markets would still prohibit, or at least give becomes an obstacle to global investors who would like to invest or hold renminbi. Again, the impossible trinity is something that China has to manage. Had to manage well, or they have to try to solve not just 3 at the same time, but at least a couple of them. But at least they have been tackling the first issues, trying to open up the foreign exchange trading. But still, I think the progress is not very aggressive. Is not aggressive enough. But as I said, the major takeaway is that, again, they still have a lot of work to do. All right, this is what I want to say, and if you have any question, I'm open up to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Professor Yao, for very interesting talk and very updated. So the now is open to the floor. So anyone who have questions, please you can type on the question. Okay. So I give well, in order to give the audience some warm up, let me ask you a question so that let the audience have some time to think about. Professor Yao, you know that the given Hong Kong important positions in China's internationalization, the Chinese currency, and with the dim sum bond market. But as you know, the for last several years, because of the setup of the national security law, that that really slow down Hong Kong's development as an international hub, because many foreign investors are moving out of Hong Kong. So do you think that Singapore have an opportunity in providing the service to this market?
Definitely, recently there have been quite a few hedge funds and also the asset management companies, foreign investment companies that have moved their headquarters or their operations from Hong Kong to Singapore. And Singapore used to also have a pretty active market for dim sum bonds. So they have issued quite a few dim sum bonds, and trading in and renminbi is also very active there. But I still see that in the long run, Hong Kong still has an advantage as long as it will open up again. Right now, I think it's not the policies that prevent foreign investors investing in renminbi denominated assets or products. Rather, it is more the political situations, especially the decisions that the local government made on with regard to the pandemic. So at least foreign investors, asset managers, they kind of leave the place for the time being. I don't think that Singapore would be able to take away the business that is renminbi denominated. They cannot. In fact, because renminbi is still a controlled currency. So as long as the Chinese government has that control, then and if global investors are coming back because the currency, the renminbi, is appreciating, then the business will still be in Hong Kong. Now, whether they have enough talents to keep doing the business or expanding the business, that's another issue.
Okay, thank you. I think there are now two questions coming up.
Okay.
So John, you can see those two questions. If you click on the question and answer.
Right. Okay, let me see. Do you believe the Chinese government is inclined to loosen the controls even to encourage adoption of RMB? I don't think so. Again, loosening the controls, they would argue that they have been doing that. So it's just a matter of degree of how much control they still have. I don't think that they are ready to open up, like capital control. So they are kind of always take the approach of filling the stones while crossing the river. In other words, they always do it on a trial basis. I don't think that they are ready or they are willing to open up the capital accounts. So the second question is, do you think China will overtake the US economically GDP-wise? This is more a much bigger question. Demographically, US is at a disadvantage. But China is not doing too well, though, demographically. although they are doing better than the US, but not better than the US. I think India is catching up in terms of the demographics. So India I would be more concerned about competition from India than from China. US, as long as we keep the same immigration policies, meaning that we still open the door to talents from all over the world, I think we still have the competitiveness. Again, that's the reason why I'm not too concerned about the demographic compositions. Okay, but in terms of the labor force, as you can recently see, right, the labor market is really tight in the US. I hope it is a short term. In the long run, we do have to somehow increase, we have to increase the population, the younger population. So again, some of the students here, you have plenty of opportunity because we don't have enough young people anyway. But the thing that our competitive niche, I think, is still in the technology. But I don't know how long that we can keep this niche. Okay, so again, I hope I answered that question. I see one of my co-author, old co-author, asking a question. How are you, Professor Guy Yang? What do you think the potential impact on Chinese yuan of the current Russian-Ukraine war? Well, again, actually, as I was preparing it, I skipped a few things. I think, again, China actually, the SIP system, which is the cross-border interbank payment system, I think that provides a lifeline to Russia for the time being. But when I look at the statistics, look at the scope of the operation, I don't think that they will gain too much of it. And in terms of the renminbi, I don't think that this conflict will help much on the value of renminbi. In fact, as I mentioned, the Belt and Road Initiative, that's a major initiative of effort of pushing the use of renminbi. But I think because the African economies are not doing well, and with these geopolitics, I don't see that it will help it significantly. But how much impact would it be on renminbi? I think it might drag it down, but I think China is pretty cautious in keeping the status quo. I think China realizes that they are facing, kind of a dilemma. At one point, they still have to work with the U.S. because without the trade with the U.S. pushing, the renminbi to become an international currency is not possible. And also, they cannot change the invoicing overnight, the numerator of the invoicing to renminbi overnight. So it will take some time. So I hope I answer your question, Guy Yan. And then another question is, since RMB internationalization is a long way to go, do you think that the global use renminbi will be impacted? Again, I think right now China is in a good position because they have already locked up the position. They got in the SDR composition. As long as they maintain, what they have been doing, kind of the percentage that they got involved in the international trade. Again, that depends very much on the relationship between China and US and China with the EU as well. As long as I think they maintain the trade relationship, then the renminbi would not suffer too much. I think I can still see some some light from the cloud. In fact, like the sun in Seattle is started coming out of the cloud. It's shining on my face now. So, yeah. All right. I don't know whether I have answered all the questions.
I think there's a couple more.
Oh, couple more. One more down here. Do you think that China is purposely using these loans to underdeveloped African and Asian countries with the knowledge that they most likely will not be able to maintain payments so as to use capitalism to achieve some level of colonialism? In fact, this is the same accusation on the US as well, as we actually try to influence other countries, right, through the capitalistic tools. Here, I would say that is inevitable that in order to get some influence, you have to help them to build up the basic economy. Now, in the long run, whether China would exploit on these countries or not, again, it depends on how you look at it. Because if you look at the benefits, both will benefit. But then at the end, then who is getting the bigger share? So that requires some kind of objective judgment, right? Who is getting the most benefit? As I see it, exploitation again comes in a full spectrum. So it depends on how much that actually one takes away from the other. I again, I wouldn't go to the one way or the other at this time. I would say that, hey, you need to gain something, then you have to give up something. So. Do you believe the trade relationship between China and the US will improve or get worse in the next decade? Again, I'm a little bit more optimistic because, both China and US are so big in the world economies, well, number one and number two, there is no way that we can get away from each other. Any politicians will actually try to maintain the relationship. But then I would see that there's getting more and more tense, meaning, as I just mentioned, we have to negotiate who will get the bigger share, the lion's share. So again, is haggling over the benefits. So, do you think that China will continue to support Russia, or do you think that given the relative importance of American markets, non-Russian trade in general, President Xi will find a way to separate China from Russia to attempt to stop the drop in trade growth and GDP this has caused? Again, I think China in general, at this time, under the leadership of President Xi, I think he is willing to give up more economic benefits for political clout. So again, that's my personal opinion. My assessment is that he would try just go back to the Cold War period in the 60s and 70s. If China were rational enough, then they should actually maintain the tripod, equilibrium, meaning China, Russia, and the US should actually try to maintain an equilibrium with each other. But I think at this time, China would just kind of take not an obvious stand. I think that they would try not to confront US directly. So again, this is, I'm not a politician, so what I can give you the answer is more from the financial and economic perspective. I think that for as long as we are economic animals, I think that we will become more rational than not being the economic animal. So.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think there are a lot of interesting questions, and Professor Yao have addressed all of them very insightful way. So I think time is running up. So unless there's some questions, and I think I think I have looked at all the questions. Is you have all addressed them, right? So I think almost time. So thank you very much, Professor Yao, for your insightful talk and very interesting topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all your questions. They are very interesting, and I enjoy the talk. Yeah. Again, thank you for the opportunity, Professor Fong.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye.